Hello, Daniel. Welcome to Gnostic Media's podcast number 43. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm still a little jet lagged from a recent trip to Denmark, but I got enough energy to do the podcast, so let's go ahead.
Well, it sounds like you were over there for what, a few weeks or something?
2.5 weeks. Yeah, just enough time to get used to the time zone over there, and then come back and have to readjust. And it's a little rough, but I'm kind of used to it. My wife's Danish, so we go back and forth once or twice a year, and it's getting very familiar over there. It's like Denmark's becoming a second home.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I used to go to Europe every year and live there for several months, so I've done the trip and experienced the jet lag and all of that many times over. Would you like to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Let's see. Well, I don't even know where to begin. Let's see. In terms of what's relevant to this interview, I've been studying medicinal plants my entire adult life. I've had a long, even when I was a teenager, I was avidly collecting exotic plants, and as a teenager, I began experimenting with psychedelic drugs, and naturally became particularly interested in the psychedelic plants. I was also very interested in the traditional use of such plants by Native Americans, as well as other indigenous people, and began reading everything I could get my hands on. And I'm 40, almost 48 now, so I've been actively studying these things since I was a teenager, quite a while now. And over the years, I've been involved in studying different types of traditional herbal medicine. And for many years, I had a medicinal plant business where I had a nursery selling live medicinal plants. I don't do that anymore, except for Salvia Divinorum. But in the course of doing all those things, I've educated myself pretty thoroughly about medicinal plants in general, but particularly the mind-altering plants, the psychedelic plants, are my particular area of expertise. Yeah.
It sounds like you've got some wind blowing in the background there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't hear it. But you've got sensitive headphones there.
Yeah, it's picking it up on your microphone like a fan or something blowing past, or I don't know.
Let me find a more secluded. I'm sort of sitting out on my porch, but I don't feel a breeze. I'm sitting out here because I don't want to talk too loud because my baby's sleeping in the house, and I've got a tiny little house. Let me move over here. This might be better. Okay. Do you still hear it?
Yeah. Well, no, actually, sorry.
Okay. Well, this seems to be a pretty good spot here. Well, if it continues to be a problem, I can go inside, although...
It seems like it's good for now.
Okay.
What was your educational background? Was it your education that spawned you into it, or just
totally unrelated? No, really? I went to I was interested in visual arts. I went to San Francisco Art Institute, and in the late 70s, and was studying photography and painting, but that's not what I ended up doing with my life. I was very interested in botany prior to that, but at the time I thought that being interested in botany meant that if you're going to make a career, it would be an academic career, which is what I really wanted to do. So my interest in plants has always been just a hobby for many years, and then like I said, I had a business selling live medicinal plants for many years, so. Sorry, I'm forgetting what the question was.
It was just about your educational background, and
right,
if that's what led you to it, or...
No, my education was in visual arts. I mean, I have taken, numerous courses over the years in traditional herbalism, Chinese medicine, and so forth, but mostly I'm self-educated.
All right, well, let's get to the core subject, or the core topic of this evening's discussion, which is Salvia Divinorum. What started your interest in salvia, and just talk about that.
Well, my interest in salvia was piqued by taking it. I experimented with a lot of different psychedelic substances and plants since my teenage years, and in the course of educating myself about psychedelic plants, I came across mention of Salvia Divinorum in various books and publications, and but back at the time when I had first heard of it, not much was known about it, and it really had this reputation of kind of a questionable psychedelic plant. Some people question whether it really was a entheogen, hallucinogen, whatever you want to call it. It had this reputation for producing very weak effects that were so subtle that you had to consume the plant in complete darkness and silence, otherwise the effects would disappear. Well, we now know that that's not the case, but at the time that was kind of common knowledge. Very few people outside the Mazatec region had tried the plant, and the people who had often had disappointing results, disappointing in the sense that they just didn't get much of an effect, if anything, from it. Also, a couple of prominent chemists who were experienced with specifically psychedelic chemistry, people like, specifically Albert Hoffman, the discoverer of LSD, and Alexander Shulgin, both studied Salvia Divinorum, and were looking for an active constituent of the plant, and neither of them were successful. And they concluded that if there was actually an active substance in the plant, that it was probably something very labile that deteriorated during the process of extraction. So, and that's what they sort of assumed was why they were coming up empty-handed. Where would you like me to go with that from there?
Well, discuss exactly what is Salvia Divinorum.
Well, okay, yeah, I guess I have to kind of assume a lot of your listeners might not know. I should speak to them rather than you, because I know, obviously, you know a fair amount about it. Salvia Divinorum is a member of the mint family. It's a type of sage. Sages are in the genus Salvia. All true sages are members of the genus Salvia, which there's roughly, it's estimated there's about 900 or so species of salvias. Salvia Divinorum is the only species of salvia known to produce a true hallucinogenic type effect. There's other ones that have some kind of subtle psychoactive properties, like they might have mild sedative effects or possibly mild stimulant type effects, but definitely nothing that induces vision. Salvia Divinorum is the only known vision-inducing salvia. In fact, it's the only known vision-inducing member of the mint family. But when I say mint family, it's kind of misleading because mints are in the same family, and the family, the Latin name is Labiatae, or it's also sometimes referred to as Lamiaceae, depending on which botanist you ask and what method of taxonomy they prefer. But it is, I'm sorry, I'm going to move something here. It is native to Mexico, to southern part of Mexico in the state of Oaxaca. It's used traditionally by the Mazatec Indians who reside there, specifically in the mountainous region in the northeast corner of the state of Oaxaca. A fairly isolated area, which up until fairly recent history was, fairly inaccessible. Up until I think sometime in the 60s or so, there was no paved road into the region. There was a dirt road that was much of it not traversable by cars. So people had to go in on horseback or walk in. So they remained isolated for a long time historically, and partly because of that, they seem to have retained a lot of their indigenous traditional healing practices using Salvia Divinorum, for example, but other kinds of vision-inducing substances like the magic mushrooms and the hallucinogenic morning glory seeds, Oloviki, which is also a morning glory relative. They continue to use these things, whereas a lot of these things were apparently the use was much more widespread in the past. There's evidence from the period of the Spanish conquest. Records from that time show that the use of vision-inducing mushrooms, for example, was pretty widespread in the Aztec territories. But since that time, that the use of the vision-inducing mushrooms, for example, was pretty much eliminated, partly because the Spaniards were very stern in trying to impose Catholicism and doing away with the traditional practices. So anyway, but Salvia Divinorum, we don't really have a record of Salvia Divinorum being used back from that time. None of the Spanish documents, chronicles from that period, mention a plant that clearly corresponds with Salvia Divinorum. So we really don't know, how long it's been in use in Mexico. I mean, presumably it's probably was discovered long ago, maybe hundreds of years ago or whatever. But today we only know of it being used by the Mazatecs. There's a couple of mentions of plant with a similar name that was used possibly by a couple of neighboring tribes, but there's no hard evidence that it's the same plant. So it's fairly rare plant. It's, in fact, in the Mazatec region, it's only known in cultivation. We don't really know of any wild populations of Salvia Divinorum, so we don't even know if it's actually native to the Mazatec region. It may have been transported there at some point in the past from some other area where it was once growing wild. It's not known to grow anyplace else, but it may have been in the past. A lot of Mexico is deforested, and things. There's probably a lot of species that no longer occur in their wild habitat. But salvia, because it's a valuable medicinal herb, has continued to be cultivated by the Mazatecs. It's possible that it is native to the Mazatec region, but since we don't know of any really definitively wild populations of it, we just don't really know. The reason, this can be kind of a complicated explanation, but yes, the plant grows very well in much of the Mazatec region, and if it's planted in a suitable location, for example, in a moist ravine, a forested ravine, which is kind of its preferred habitat, it will just grow on its own. It rains a lot in the Mazatec mountains, and it will just grow and kind of spread into the surrounding area on its own. So if it goes, if a planted plot is abandoned, it will persist in an area and kind of become a naturalized plant in that area. Basically becomes a feral plant, and after many years, the plant just looks like a natural plant, and it's hard to know if it's actually was deliberately planted in that location at some point in the past, or if it's truly growing wild. The reason we don't know whether those kinds of populations of the plant are truly wild is because the plant almost never produces seeds, and if the plant was producing seeds freely, then you could argue that, well, the plant's growing in this location, it appears to be wild, and it produces seeds, so chances are it was quite plausible that it is a wild plant in there, and it wasn't necessarily planted there. But because it doesn't produce seeds, it casts some suspicion on whether it's actually a really wild plant. It's pretty unusual for a truly wild growing plant not to produce seeds. The reason that it doesn't produce seeds, or very, very rarely produces seeds, is still uncertain, but the most likely explanation is something called inbreeding depression, when a plant is isolated from its wild population, and you just have a very narrow little gene pool. Maybe just one strain was transported from its original habitat at some point in the past. Just for example, for argument's sake, if something like that happened and the plant was brought to the Mazatec region, you have this limited genetic diversity. The plant's was basically just is breeding back against itself, and it causes a condition that often happens in that situation called inbreeding depression, where the plant will lose its ability to produce. Let's see. Well, I don't even know where to begin. Let's see. Well, in terms of what's relevant to this interview, I've been studying medicinal plants my entire adult life. I've had a long, even when I was a teenager, I was avidly collecting exotic plants, and as a teenager, I began experimenting with psychedelic drugs, and naturally became particularly interested in the psychedelic plants. I was also very interested in the traditional use of such plants by Native Americans, as well as other indigenous people, and then began reading everything I could get my hands on. And I'm 40, almost 48 now, so I've been actively studying these things since I was a teenager, quite a while now. And over the years, I've been involved in it's a little rough, but I'm kind of used to it. My wife's Danish, so we go back and forth once or twice a year, and it's getting very familiar over there. It's like Denmark's becoming a second home.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I used to go to Europe every year and live there for several months, so I've done the trip and experienced the jet lag and all of that many times over. Would you like to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay.
Hello, Daniel. Welcome to Gnostic Media's podcast number 43. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm still a little jet lagged from a recent trip to Denmark, but I got enough energy to do the podcast, so let's go ahead.
Well, it sounds like you were over there for what, a few weeks or something?
2.5 weeks. Yeah, just enough time to get used to the time zone over there, and then come back and have to readjust. And I was studying different types of traditional herbal medicine. And for many years, I had a medicinal plant business where I had a nursery selling live medicinal plants. I don't do that anymore, except for Salvia Divinorum. But in the course of doing all those things, I've educated myself pretty thoroughly about medicinal plants in general, but particularly the mind-altering plants, the psychedelic